DW Africa Link.
The recent war of words between Uganda and Germany has escalated into a significant diplomatic rift, prompting Uganda's military, the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, to officially terminate all military cooperation with Germany. Now, this drastic action follows the UPDF's accusation of Berlin's ambassador to Kampala of involvement in, quote, subversive activities. In a recent social media post, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni's son, Muhoozi Kyen Rugaba, head of the army, hinted at some issues with the current German ambassador to Uganda, Matthias Schauer, branding him wholly unqualified. Germany's foreign ministry has vehemently rejected these accusations, calling them absurd, baseless, and without merit. So how did both sides reach this boiling point? And how can tensions be eased? That's what's coming up. I am Eddy Micah Jr, and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
The diplomatic row between Germany and Uganda came after Matthias Schauer, Germany's ambassador to Uganda, was singled out for criticizing the Ugandan army and government for torturing opposition members. In response, the army accused some European embassies of supporting, quote, negative and treacherous groups. The accusations against EU diplomats was after they met with opposition parties, including Bobi Wine. This meeting was seen as a direct challenge to the Ugandan government authority and was met with strong opposition. Uganda's army chief, Kyen Rugaba, had previously warned the EU about, quote, playing with fire. Let's get more from Godber Tumushabe, a lawyer, policy analyst, and the associate director at Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies based in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you very much for coming, sir. Also, DW correspondent Frank Yiga is also joining us from Kampala, Uganda. Welcome to Africa Link, both of you. You know, Frank, it's been back and forth. I have to tell you, I've been just sitting back and watching all of this play out between your country, Uganda, and Germany, where I am currently. Tell us more about the current relationship between Uganda and Germany. I mean, what's going on? How did we even get here?
Well, how we got here is the question that many of us don't have answers to. But of course, we can try to look through. The situation is tensional, and of course, it's suspicious. But of course, this came as a surprise to many Ugandans, though cutting ties was the least expected. Some people are saying that what sparked off the tension was when delegates from the European Union visited the opposition National Unity Platform offices. That was on the 15th of May, and had a closed-door meeting with the party officials. And the EU officials sent a message to the security agencies to stop torture and abduction of members of the opposition. And then on the 21st of May, there was another meeting where the EU delegates met with General Salim Saleh, that's President Museveni's brother, in Gulu, northern Uganda. And during this meeting, a lot was exchanged, and the German ambassador to Uganda and other ambassadors expressed concerns about the gross violation of human rights and the inflammatory social media posts by the commander of defense forces, that is, and also the president's son, General Muhoozi Kyen Rugaba. So last Sunday is when we saw a bombshell, when the UPDF Director of Defense and Public Information, Colonel Chris Magezi, announced that Uganda had cut military cooperation with the German government, accusing the ambassador, Matthias Schauer, of engaging in subversive activities which threaten national security. And overall, of course, many people were wondered why the German ambassador. For me personally, I think this could have been anyone else. It could have been the ambassador of EU. But I think the dice fell on the German ambassador, maybe because he was vocal in the meeting and all that. So that's how we got there.
Right. I mean, look, I'll come straight to you, Godber, because help us break this down. Is there even, for starters, any justification whatsoever for Uganda to cut any military cooperation with Germany?
First of all, I think we just need to understand what exactly has happened. It's a normal that diplomatic relations and military security cooperation among two sovereign countries, that any severing of relations are going to be announced by some shady director of communication in a ministry. These are matters of foreign policy. So, in other words, if there was any problem with the German ambassador or with Germany as a country, one would have expected to see the Minister of Foreign Affairs summoning the ambassador and laying on the table what the issues are. If the situation had deteriorated so much, we would have expected to see the Minister of Defense of the government of Uganda probably being the one talking and communicating this issue. The fact that we are seeing some low-level ranking officer in the UPDF announcing this, I am not even sure whether that actually is the position of the government of Uganda. Because to my knowledge, it hasn't been commonplace. The Uganda People's Defense Forces as an institution is the one that conducts or communicates on foreign relations. This has only come with the appointment of Museveni's son as CDF Kyen Rugaba. So, like we said in a paper that we published in 2021, the way the power has concentrated now in the family of Mr. Museveni, in what we call the unholy trinity, the Father, the Son, and the unholy Spirit, it is very difficult to know who is actually making the decisions. Does the low-ranking officer in the UPDF who announced the severing of cooperation between the UPDF and Germany, does he actually speak for government of Uganda? So I think that the issue that you are dealing with is one where you have a government that no longer has clear channels of communication, even when you are dealing with international relations.
Right, and that's very good points that you're making. But at the end of the day, if this was not a government position, then you would assume that the president himself will come out and say something against it. So as things stand, it suggests that they are on the same page with, the information or the communication that has been going on. Isn't that what we would agree on?
No, incidentally, I hold a different opinion.
Okay.
Because President Museveni's natural character is that he doesn't respond to crisis in a crisis-like manner. Every time something like this has taken place, he normally takes a step back. In fact, his silence is normally conspicuous. I would not be surprised if the president picked a phone and called the German ambassador and said, "You ignore that." He is unlikely to come in and issue a statement and say that's not the position of the government. So that's not how President Museveni conducts or responds to situations of the nature that we're dealing with. So I wouldn't really say because he is quiet, he actually acquiesces to the statement that was issued.
Which is interesting, you say, but that just makes it even more confusing, doesn't it? Because as it stands, the information out there is that Uganda's military has basically cut all military cooperation with Germany, right? And so is that the case now, or do we have to wait and see if that is actually going to be the situation? Or because who are we listening to? Are we listening to basically the commander of the military, right, who happens to be the president's son, right? Or are we listening to a communications person? What is the current government stand? Because this is a serious issue. If you want to cut
very, very serious
military cooperation with Germany, and you feel that maybe Museveni is not on that same page, President Museveni is not on that same page, where are we at now then?
Yeah, actually, I think that is exactly the problem. So look at it this way. What is the nature of military cooperation between Uganda and Germany? Normally, I can imagine I would be thinking of like probably provision of military equipment. In most cases, it is provision of training support. whether it is German military people coming here to train, and then Ugandan military officers training in maybe in German academies. So I can imagine that that's the nature of military cooperation. Maybe the other thing I would add could be sharing of intelligence. So if the UPDF, whether it is the CDF or his spokesperson, said we are severing relations, the only aspect of such a relationship they are severing would be intelligence cooperation, because the other things would be in favor of Uganda. It is as narrow as it is. And then secondly, the communication that needs to be given out cannot be coming from Minister of Defense. You can even see from the German government. Have you heard the German military talking about this issue? The only communication we've had from the Germany is from the Foreign Affairs Ministry. That's how foreign policy and diplomatic relations are conducted. So to that extent, I would say mine would be a wait and see approach. Is this the actual position of the government of Uganda, or some errant military officer simply went and because he's not happy and announced this? And I think as Frank said, really the provocation, what I would say, provocation in courts, is basically coming from the fact that Muhoozi, the CDF, has no regard for political opposition parties and leaders. And therefore, the mere fact that the ambassadors went and met with the leadership of the National Unity Platform, led by Bobby Wine or Robert Chagulanyi, whom he has actually been threatening on Twitter over and over again that he's going to arrest him and have him tortured. That definitely has been the provocation.
Right.
But whether what he communicated represents the government of Uganda is a matter that we have to wait and see, because on all these important matters, the president is always missing in action, and that is the crisis we face as a country.
Right. And I'm going to come to you in a bit, Frank, but you touched on something interesting, Godber, about what seems to have riled up both sides, right? The meeting of opposition leader Bobby Wine. So is that enough provocation to get to where we are? Is that some sort of interference, you'd say? Because clearly this has contributed to, the tension between both sides. Was it, so to speak, wise, diplomatically correct for, the ambassadors and some of these EU leaders to go and meet with the opposition?
I don't see if there is anything else that the ambassadors would do, because some of us talk to the ambassadors and we've challenged them. You can't bring money from German taxpayers and support the government of Uganda, and then you are supporting a government that kidnaps its people, that tortures its people, that even kills its people. You can't be the German government and you are supporting the UPDF, the Uganda People's Defense Forces, and then its leader is the one who is kidnapping and torturing people, and then you say you are an ambassador of a democratic country. So these ambassadors, they are in a catch-22 situation. How do they deal with a partner on this side of the world that does not respect human rights, that does not respect the dignity of its citizens? So really, I can sympathize with these ambassadors, because otherwise, if they cannot meet with the other players within the government of Uganda, then they should pack and go home.
I mean, is it the ambassador's place to do what he did, meet with the opposition? One. Two, as you are rightly saying, if you have an issue with a country that you're in, representing, Germany or Germany's leader, then either you help address it with the government or you leave. You go back to Germany then, because you feel uncomfortable dealing with the government, as you say. But a meeting with the opposition, some would call interference, which has been something that is being used by a lot of African leaders, that a lot of Western countries and, foreigners sort of interfere with what goes on the continent. Isn't that understandable?
No, I think that if you are the diplomatic community of a country, I think that you have a right to engage with any legally recognized entities within that country.
Okay.
If I was government of Uganda, as a reciprocal measure, I would be asking our ambassador in Germany and say, you meet with all the German opposition political leaders. That is, if you have any issue or agenda that you want to raise, that would be a reciprocal arrangement. But
Okay.
to be just there complaining because the National Unity Platform that the ambassadors met with is a legally registered and legally recognized political party in the country. It has the highest representation in the parliament. So I don't see why anybody would restrain themselves from meeting a registered political party. Because the government of Uganda is not just some ruling group called the ruling party. It is also all the segments of the Ugandan society, the political parties, the civil society, and all the others. So as long as the ambassadors are recognized as, or these countries are recognized as partners, they should have the liberty to be able to engage with the full breadth of the Ugandan society.
Kyen Rugaba, who is head of the army, that's President Museveni's son, seems quite, I want to find the right word. He basically he's been very strong with all this back and forth and the statements that he's raising. European and foreign diplomats are not happy with the inflammatory posts that he's been making. Also, in some cases, boasting on social media platform X, formerly Twitter, of torturing opposition members. How is he, in particular, contributing to denting Uganda's relations with the West? And what's the likely impact overall?
I think right now I would describe Kyen Rugaba as a stress factor for Uganda. if you're looking at stress factors, because it is very difficult to understand how a very highly respected institution like the Uganda People's Defense Forces can have a chief of defense forces that is able to tweet more or less, like you would say, carelessly, the way Kyen Rugaba does. Because even if you were unhappy with certain players, the position that he holds, the level of training that he has had, having gone through a series of elite military academies, the level of education and exposure, you can't just tweet for, you just, throw everything on Twitter. It just doesn't work that way. So,
also, as the head of a military, it's just not done, is it? Like that's a diplomatic thing that the military should not be involved in.
Yeah, as the head of the military, because UPDF in Uganda is almost the only remaining respected institution of state. So the fact that he's able to be there and tweet the way he tweets, he becomes a stress factor for the country. What has been evidenced even in this diplomatic controversy is that you are talking of a family that is in control of power, and that becomes very problematic for diplomats to deal with, because diplomats are used to dealing with state institutions.
Right. Okay, very interesting topic, and we could go on and on and on, but I think we would leave it here. Very insightful from the both of you. Godber Tumushabe, lawyer, policy analyst, and the associate director at Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies based in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you very much. Also, TW correspondent Frank Yiga in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you. The military's public accusation is unusual and signals a serious diplomatic breakdown, especially since Germany denies any formal military cooperation with Uganda. So, what does Germany's current relationship with Uganda say about its overall relationship with African countries. To help us understand this, we have Dr. Henrik Mahak, the head of the Africa department at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, FES, in Berlin. The FES is a German political foundation that promotes the core values of freedom, justice, solidarity, and peace. And its insights are crucial in understanding Germany's foreign policy towards Africa. Hello, Henrik. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Germany's new government, led by conservatives and Chancellor Friedrich Merz, is facing a critical need to bolster its policy in support of democracies across Africa. How would you describe the current relationship between Germany and African countries?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would describe the current relationship as generally good, because Germany enjoys quite a bit of trust on the continent. At least that's what we're hearing from our partners at FES. And it's not seen as focusing so much on a certain geopolitical agenda, maybe compared to France and the US, but is seen as a partner that enjoys trust in societies, but also governments. So Germany, as Europe as a whole, has this more multidimensional approach. So talking to governments, society, trade unions, feminists, everyone on the continent, I think that approach is valued. But of course, we have been hearing more demands from African partners to clearly lay out what German interests are. And I think that's the task for the new government, to not only focus on issues that Germany cares about, but link that to issues that partners in Africa care about. So here I feel there needs to be an honest conversation so that migration policies that Germany and Europe supports are also working for the countries in Africa. And of course, Germany and Europe has an aging population. So we depend on having migration policies that make Germany an attractive place to come to. I'm not sure we're always there on the right track.
Yeah, as you say, we'll have to wait and see what the policy of this government is regarding, somehow connecting with the continent and seeing where the collaboration can be. But in your recent paper, right, again, for the FES that you work with in the Africa department, you discussed supporting African democracies through, economic assistance in debt crisis and dialogue with protest movements. Explain how this can be achieved when governments often, clamp down on protest movements. I mean, it's happening all around the world, and different reasons given for clamping down on a certain protest. I mean, Germany, you see some protests being clamped down and all, but now focusing on the continent, how do you expect to do this with all those possible challenges?
Some of the protests that we've seen in Africa over the last years, for example, the protests in Kenya last June, July, these were protests that were on the one side directed against the government imposing tax hikes. But these protests were also directed against the IMF and global financial system that make it very hard to get out of a debt crisis. And I think by owing a lot of debt to international creditors, governments in Africa have a very hard time to delivering those public goods, health, education, that citizens in democratic societies rightly expect to be given access to. And I think here, African countries cannot solve this alone. So if Germany supports African countries in achieving the goals that the African Union and the European Union have both laid out, which are supporting democratic governance, then it's important that also Germany plays its part by making sure democracies can actually deliver. And without solving the debt crisis, I have doubts that countries like Ghana, Zambia, Kenya will be able to deliver those public goods that citizens expect.
Right. Quick one before I let you go. I mean, again, we know the current situation. Now, where do you see the future of this relationship? I mean, many a times we've been talking about, countries like Germany, a lot of other European countries, Western countries, dealing with African countries on an equal level, right? As partners, not a top-down sort of approach, which has been, as you know, the accusation from many African countries. Where do we see that heading in the near future, and how really mutually respectful relationship are we, likely to see?
For me, I think it would be great if this relationship is heading in a direction where we see the cooperation of value-based middle powers, for example, like South Africa and Germany, strengthening certain and pushing certain agendas that work for both countries. So I think here we need to come on towards a more equal relationship. I think in Africa, in many places, there's allegations that the European aid system has been too paternalistic, has been too long based on kind of a colonial or neo-colonial mindset. And I think it's important for the German government, also this new one, to take this seriously and address issues that African partners rightly criticize when it comes to the way the partnership is currently structured.
Right. Fingers crossed for that. Dr. Henrik Mahak, Head of Africa Department at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, FES, in Berlin. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We'd love to hear your thoughts about all of this, so please share them with us on our Facebook page, DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. Don't forget to click follow and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe, and I am Eddy Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW News.
Here are today's top news happenings and why they matter.